This is Entrepreneurs Get Visible, the podcast for people who want more impact, influence, and income. I'm Anna Parker-Naples, and I'll be sharing with you proven methods from leading entrepreneurs that help you get visible as an authority in your field. Because anything's possible when you get visible. So you've got your podcast out there into the world, but how do you go about monetizing it so that it is a thing that is bringing money into your business rather than just consuming time? And is actually bringing you in some profit into your business. Now, the first thing I want to say about this is that I don't think a podcast's value is just in the money opportunities that it brings to you. I think the podcast value is much more about the impact you can have and the reach that you can grow in order to bring people into your email list, in order to then be able to sell to them from there, in order for them to grow and nurture that relationship with you. So that is the first thing about a podcast. It doesn't actually have to have adverts or affiliation links on it. However, many people do want to do that once they've got their podcast out there and it's working for them in other ways. So you want to think about your podcast being able to be monetized in terms of how it brings people into your list for future sales, how it brings people into your communities, how it enables you to grow your reach as a potential speaker and to collaborate with other people. All of those things are about growing that monetization. However, what we're going to address in this episode is much more about how do you bring in that specific revenue from advertising on your show. So the first thing in that is that there are two ways to go about monetization. There is what is known as CPA method, cost per acquisition, and then there is cost per mille, CPM. Now, the cost per acquisition is when you would have a link or an affiliation link to somebody else's service or product, and it would be automatically set up that when somebody used that service or bought that product, you would then automatically be getting a cut. You would automatically get revenue into your business. So a good example of this is if you were to sign up to become a podcast affiliate for Audible, for example. That's one of the easiest ways to get started with these affiliation links. You sign up as part of their affiliation program. They send you a specific link, which you mention in your podcast episode, and then you'd have it on your show notes. And whenever anybody went there, they would get a free first £15 audiobook, and you would then get a cut of whatever they got when they signed up. So whatever they paid when they eventually signed up and became a paying member of Audible. So it works for your listener and it works for you because you get direct money into your bank account. And there are many, many, many companies and services that have these affiliation services where you join their program and you get a link and you can put it on your show notes, mention it in your program. So that is how an affiliation service would look like for a CPA, a cost per acquisition method of monetizing your podcast. But what you'd need to do really is go back to your ideal avatar, your ideal listener, and think, what do they need to know? What are they learning about? And what services do I use, or what knowledge do I have about things that would make their life easier? And I would break down every single book, every single service, every single product, things you are using naturally in your own business. So for example, who you host your website with, maybe you could get a link to that so that if somebody followed your recommendation, that you would then get a cut of that. It might be how you host your CRM, for example. You might be able to join an affiliation program for that. For example, with podcast hosting, I have an affiliation with Libsyn, so I get a cutback if someone goes through my link. But if they go through my link, they're going to get a month or two for free. So all of these things, if you're monetizing your podcast deliberately and strategically, thinking about the things you're going to naturally talk about in your episode anyway, and then beginning to think about potentially using those affiliation links to actually promote them in specific parts of your podcast if you wanted to, with pre, mid and post roll adverts. Now, those adverts would be about those products that you're recommending, and you would create them yourself. It would be your voice. That's the power of podcasting. People are much more likely to buy if it's you rather than a polished advert. So that is one way to go about monetizing your podcast using affiliation links. It does work just as well with things that you've mentioned within your episode. So for example, any books that I mention on this episode, I have an Amazon influencers account or an Amazon Associates account. Not everybody's got the influencer access yet. And you can set up that account. So every time you recommend something, you can say, go to my website and you can get the link. So why wouldn't you do that when you can get a couple of pounds here, a couple of pounds there? If you're starting to get tens of thousands of listeners, then these things can really add up over time. So the other thing to think about is going into partnership with a company who wants to promote on your podcast, who wants to get in front of your audience. And this would be when you were looking at the cost per mille version of how you monetize your podcast. So what you would be doing in the first instance is approaching, again, that list, people who are on that list, companies on that list of products and services you are happy to be connected with. So there is some level of integrity here. You don't want to just have anything promoted on your podcast. You're going to approach them by saying, these are my current numbers. These are my downloads per week or per month. And you want to give them per 1,000 that are listened to per month, or even per episode. You're going to give them a figure of a particular amount. If you came on board for 10 episodes, per episode, it would be this amount of pounds or this amount of dollars per mille, per 1,000 that are listening. And you might want to approach them for a 4-week test or a 6-week period or a 10-week episode block, and they would be your sponsor on that block. Now, there are 3 places to sponsor. There is the beginning, that's called the pre-roll, which would be approximately 30 seconds, just after your own intro and before the meat, before the body of your podcast. Then there would be what's called mid-roll, which is approximately halfway through or at a significant point in your podcast. And that's usually a minute long. So you would literally add in an intersection where you were then talking about that product, why you think it's great, and how people can then access it. And then the final slot then would be a 30-second slot right at the end of the podcast, just before you close. And there are different payment structures around each of those, but based on this idea of cost per mille, cost per 1,000. Now, the interesting thing about this is that there are some standards in terms of pricing arising, which I'll be talking a lot more about if you follow my content, but it's about that Wild West that's happening now. Podcasts are growing and people want onto other people's audiences because they can see how effective they are and how loyal those listeners are. The statistics for people who are purchasing as a result of listening to a trusted podcaster are astonishing. People are something like 86% more likely to buy from a podcast with a host that they trust than any other medium right now. So that's fascinating to me. So you do want to think about how to monetize your podcast. But before you do that, you need to make sure your content is great and that you are reaching those downloads. And personally, I wouldn't be reaching out to anyone for a podcast sponsorship deal until you'd got to about 10,000 downloads in total. And then starting to look at least 1,000 per episode. So you want to make sure your content is great in the first place, and you want to make sure that whoever you approach, it would be a good sponsorship deal that is going to work for you. And effectively, there are 3 places where you could have an advertiser on your podcast. It's easy to see how quickly you can really be making some good income from your podcast. But for me, that monetization does not have to be advertisements. It does not have to be that. It does not have to be deliberately placed advert. It can be how you share your content, how you share your knowledge, and how you drive people into the rest of your business, into that funnel. So just to recap today, we've talked about 1, making sure you've got great content for the right listeners, making sure that you understand what your avatar's needs are, the products, services, books, information, what those all are and where people can go to get them. Looking at which of those products and services have affiliation links that you could just join their program and put those links, mention them in your podcast, have them on your resources page, have them on your show notes, make it easy for people to know where to go to purchase those things from you, where maybe they get a coupon code or a discount or a freebie and you get a cut of what they pay when they become a paying client to that product or service. And then the final thing is to look at sponsors. And actually then just reach out to them. Send them an introductory email with what your podcast is about, who your ideal listeners are. and the numbers. It's the stats that count. The other way to go about this is to look at joining a company that does these sponsorship partnerships for you, a podcast partnership company. There are many of those out there. Obviously, they'll be taking a cut, so there's less money that's going to reach your bank account. But if you don't want to do this personally and build those relationships with sponsors yourself, there are people who can take this off your hands. But again, it's about having the right numbers in the first place. So go out there, get your message out into the world in front of the right people, and your podcast can be powerfully monetized. Thank you for listening to Entrepreneurs Get Visible. To get your free checklist on how to raise your profile and to find out about our community, go to annaparkernaples.co.uk/get visible.